In St. John's Gospel, Jesus refers to himself as the bread of life. Now, what do you make of that expression? What was he referring to when he says, I am the bread of life? Well, I suppose most Christians would naturally think of the Eucharist, of Holy Communion, where we receive Christ under the form of bread. And in fact, in the Eucharistic prayer, in the Mass, the priest says, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation. This is the real meaning of it. But there is a deeper meaning which is more important than that. Jesus is saying, you need me as you need bread, as you need food. Physically, you need food to keep alive. As Jesus is saying, you need me, a relationship with me, to be really alive. And in St. John's Gospel, this is brought out, as St. John often does with the thing. He takes people of misunderstanding and going for simply the physical thing. So at the beginning of that chapter 6, people want to follow Christ because he had the gift of healing. They wanted the healing, they didn't want Christ. And just after feeding 5,000 people, they wanted to make him king so they could get free bread. Looking for what he has to give. What is most important in our lives isn't the physical thing, but the people you love, your family. You may be hunting for a job, and that's terrible, but because you need it to supply it for your family, to look after your family. We live at two levels. See, there's a physical level, but also what you might call a spiritual level in our minds, in our hearts. Where a person grows in love shows both those elements. When you fall in love, first time I ever saw your face, I thought the earth moved in your eyes. Oh, that wonderful feeling of falling in love. Beyond that, you go until you love the person. At first, it's what the person brings you. When she comes into the room, or when you hear his voice, everything comes alive. Most wonderful feeling. But you go beyond that when you simply not what they bring to you, but what you can do to the other person. And if a person's love doesn't grow like that, will you go from one relationship to another, wanting the thrill of falling in love, and when that's gone on, drop them and go to someone else? When you love a baby, the sight of a newborn baby, if it's your child, is beautiful. And you go beyond that, not just the beauty of gazing and feeding the child, but you will do anything for that person. If we grow in love, we grow more and more beyond what they give us physically to see or to hear. And we move into another world, another dimension. A friend of mine, an Anglican priest, went to Latvia just after communism had fallen in that country. And so the people he met, all their lives, they hadn't heard of Christ, or prayer, or God, or anything religious. That was stamped out effectively under communist rule. None of their parents had prayed or knew anything about it. An occasional person would say, I think my grandmother did, but never saw her. And among them, a group became Christian. So this friend of mine was really puzzled. How do you become Christian? See, if it's in a Christian country, would say, well, because we all know about Jesus, but it didn't mean much to me and so on. But they knew nothing. And one of the strongest things, strangely enough, was music. Somebody said they had a music teacher who really brought it to life. And they moved into another dimension. It might be neo-spirituals, it might be other religious music, or some not religious at all. But the feeling I was moving into a completely different dimension. made people realise there's more to it than a physical world. Often the death of someone, especially the death of a child, a realisation that this physical world isn't everything. There is something far more important. One woman who gave birth prematurely was told that her child would be permanently disabled. She just needed to pray. She said at the time, I don't know where it came from. Later she said that the Spirit of God. She hunted through an old magazine and found a little prayer which she said every day. She later discovered it was the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. A totally different way of living. So we have our physical life, and unfortunately that can dominate. We think we are human beings, and just occasionally we have a spiritual experience. I think it's more true to say we are spiritual beings having something of a human existence. The real world is beyond what we see here. But it is through what we see, through music, through art, through beauty of nature, or sometimes through accidents that seem to happen in your life, when you realise that the Lord is leading. There is something greater beyond this. Look for it and treasure those glimpses that you have. A friend of mine was telling me she was brought up in an orphanage where they were very strict and very kind. And in the stories they told them, often they talked about the beautiful sunrise and the beautiful sunset. And she knew the sunset was beautiful because alongside the grounds of the orphanage was a large lake, and as the sun went down beyond it, she said it was beautiful. But she'd never seen the sunrise because there was a strict rule: no boy or girl may leave the dormitory except to go to the lavatory until the bell goes in the morning. But one day she said, I'm going to get up and see the sunrise. So she left all her clothes on the chair next to her, didn't undress properly, got into bed. And as soon as it got light, she crept and got dressed and went carefully out of the dormitory. Then along a long corridor, on one side she said there were statues of Our Lady and the saints of the Sacred Heart. On the other side she could see pictures of the rectors and the benefactors. So she put her head down so they wouldn't see her. And she went along this long corridor, then out through the door down to the lake and waited. And then of course she realised the sun wouldn't rise over the lake but the other way. So she turned round and looked. What a disappointment. She said it was just a round red ball coming up in the sky. Oh, she said, I suppose you're beautiful, but not as beautiful as the sunset. Then she turned round and looked at the lake. Now the sun was red, but the lake was golden as the sun touched the tops of the trees, and trees were reflected in the water, rippling. And birds came alive. A couple of swans came across, presumably to be fed. Everything came alive, and she was just transfixed looking at it. She said, I just sang, oh, the love of my Lord is the essence, all the beauty he gives, I see he has given to me. O Lord my God, when I on also wonder, see that, oh, how great thou art, and the tears pouring down her face, just transfigured, oh, out of this world with the beauty of it, a thing she said to me I will never forget. And in the middle of that, the bell went from the dormitory. Too late to get back in time, so she trudged up the hill, turned round and said to the lake, Lake, I'm in deep trouble. But I'm glad I came, because the God of the lake is so much more beautiful than the God of the orphanage. We get stuck with the God of the orphanage or the God of our ordinary life. Look at the moments, try to recall the times when you have glimpsed the other world, treasure them and see them. Because sometimes we miss the point. You have the experience, but you miss the meaning. A bit like if I point to something. If I point and you look, good. If I point to a dog, the dog looks at my finger. He doesn't look at what I'm pointing to. I'm afraid we're a bit like that. We have in this world a way of glimpsing what is beyond and what is more real. And then you can forget it or pass over it as being unimportant. Treasure those glimpses of the other world, often through music or painting or poetry, but also not only through creation as you see it, but things that happen in your life. How you were touched simply to know that your grandchild was born, or that someone was still alive, or sometimes for no apparent reason, just flooded with a sense of gratitude to God, like those people in Latvia, not knowing where it came from, wondering if something's gone wrong with them, but so sure that there was this other world beyond what is physical. Christ says, I am the bread of life. There is a life which is much more vibrant, much more real than the physical life. And our physical food and drink, roof over our head, those things, important physically. But Christ said, come to me and you will have a much greater life. That is the bread of life. Pray that we will see God in any part of our life, sometimes just with reflection. There's a Celtic blessing summarizing that. Where the sun awakens the day, where the road winds on its way, where the fields are sweet with hay, may we see the Lord. Where the leaves are gently rustling, where marketplace is bustling, where rush hour crowds are jostling, may we see the Lord. Where the stars shine in the sky, where the streets so peaceful lie, where darkness now is nigh, may we see the Lord.